All right, folks, we are back here on WLTH 1370 AM. That's 92.7 in the FM dial. Hope you enjoyed Shaggy, Mr. Bombastic. Yes, before we went to Shaggy and the musical spotlight and the Happy Happies, we actually were in a discussion about how the United States government, through the CIA and in the past United States Information Agency and the FBI, as well as the NED, all use pop culture, American pop culture, music, movies, TV, even art. You wouldn't think a painting could be used for subversive political reasons, but sure enough, the CIA and the NED and the FBI apparently think that you can, because they did. So we were talking about that early on. One of the great victims of American imperialism and American propaganda is the island of Cuba. Yes, the land of Fidel Castro and the Cuban Revolution. They were in the news this week. That's really why I wanted to do this story, because when I've seen this story presented, it has been presented as a failure of communism. And that is the power outage in the country of Cuba that has plunged 10 million Cuban citizens into total darkness. And if you saw the story at all covered in the media, they made sure you saw citizens who were disgruntled and banging on pots and pans and absolutely demanding that their government get off its lazy communist butts and fix their power grid. But what if I told you that Cuba didn't just become Cuba because of its horrible economic system called communism? What if I told you that Cuba was another of the many victims of United States foreign policy? And that this blackout that they just had is just the latest in a long series of consequences of America's foreign policy towards the island of Cuba. It all goes back to the blockade, the embargo against Cuba. The embargo against Cuba has prevented United States businesses from conducting trade or commerce with Cuban interests since 1958. U.S. economic sanctions against Cuba are comprehensive and impact every sector of the Cuban economy. It is the most enduring trade embargo in the history, at least in modern world history. Now, why did they do this? Well, the Cuban Revolution saw to the nationalization of Cuba. High U.S. import taxes and forfeiture of U.S.-owned economic assets, including oil refineries, without compensation for the capitalists who owned and controlled those things. So basically, the Cuban government, after the revolution, said, this is ours now. Before Fidel Castro came into power, they used to call Cuba the brothel of the Caribbean. Americans used to go to Cuba for sex trafficking. And they used to regularly have sex with trafficked women and sometimes children, men as well. Let's just be real. I mean, I've heard some stories about Hollywood celebrities who went to Cuba to have relations with some of these people who were in that line of work, because that's what Cuba was known for. And when Fidel Castro took over, he said, no more of this. We're not going to be exploited politically, economically, and yes, even sexually any longer. And so the United States government retaliated in 1960 with an extended embargo on all imports to Cuba, with an exception for food and medicine. So for a while, they let food and medicine go through. Then Cuba held nuclear missiles for the Soviet Union during the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis, which led the United States to impose a full-scale blockade against the island. So, since 1962, Cuba has been completely cut off by the richest, most powerful country in the history of the world. And here's the irony, right? They cut Cuba off for hosting nuclear missiles for the Soviet Union. And so having Soviet nuclear missiles just 90 minutes away from America in a sovereign nation was too much for the United States of America to bear. But, and here's a giant but, the United States seemingly can't understand why Vladimir Putin would not want the United States and NATO to put nuclear weapons and other dangerous weapons on his border with Ukraine. So basically, Putin is responding to the same exact thing that the United States was responding to in 1962. But the way it's presented in our culture and our media is, well, of course, we can't let the Soviet Union have nuclear weapons 90 minutes away in a sovereign nation. But when it's Vladimir Putin, it's, oh, he's a horrible monster for invading Ukraine so that they won't be able to put dangerous nuclear weapons on his border. How dare he not allow a sovereign nation to work with their global sworn enemy, the United States, to put nuclear weapons and to arm their population against the Russian people. So it just goes to show you the hypocrisy. Once again, the hypocrisy of American foreign policy once again. And the whole world sees this. This is another thing we don't talk about a lot in this country, thanks to our media being owned and controlled by a few rich billionaires and being full of propaganda from the CIA, the FBI, and the NED and all these other entities. Every year since 1992, the United Nations has passed resolutions to suspend the embargo against Cuba. So that's 32 years. For 32 years, every single year, every country on the planet practically votes that the embargo against Cuba is barbaric and should be ended as soon as possible. Every year, the United States votes on the illegal blockade of Cuba. The last time they voted, which was last year, 2 countries supported the blockade. The United States, and guess who? Guess who? Just guess. Guess who? Come on. Come on. Guess. Hello, caller. You want to guess who the other country is?
Israel.
Yup. It's Israel. You got it.
Wow.
Wow, yes.
Can you imagine? Wow.
Yes.
Hey,
Yes!
you know,
Yes! Yes!
Yeah, go ahead, brother.
that's pretty cool. You know, when I watch the GOP bring their president in our Congress to insult our president in the Congress, you have to know how bad things really are.
I heard that. Thank you for calling, brother.
Yeah, you know, and one thing that I could, you know, I've been looking in this routine with the way religion in the 16th century converted the humankind into these special races.
Wait! I can't get into that. I gotta finish the thing on Cuba, but we could get into that some other time. But thanks for calling, brother. But yeah, the caller got it. It's Israel. It's Israel. And the other country that is staying is our new puppet state, Ukraine. But every other country, 187 countries, including the United Kingdom, we're supposed to have a special relationship with, demanded an end to the barbaric blockade against Cuba. Now, there was some good news some years ago. One of the few things Barack Obama did that I agreed with while he was president, he eased the travel ban, which allowed Cuban Americans to travel freely to Cuba. He later extended the easing in 2011 to students and religious missionaries. A few years later, in 2014, he announced his intention to formally reestablish relations with Cuba. So that was one of the best things Barack Obama did as president. The two nations completed a prisoner exchange with Cuba, releasing an unnamed American intelligence officer and Alan Gross, a contractor who had spent 5 years in a Cuban prison after being accused of subversion. Cuba also agreed to release 53 political prisoners and to allow Red Cross and human rights investigators access to the country. Obama met with Raul Castro, Fidel Castro's little brother, in 2015, which was the first meeting between the leaders of Cuba and the United States in over 50 years. In May of 2015, several U.S. companies reported that they had been granted licenses to establish ferry travel between Florida and Cuba, with the U.S. Treasury Department confirming it. And even after that, in 2015, the U.S. removed Cuba from its designated list of state sponsors of terrorism. So that was a big thing. The U.S. banks were allowed to open accredited accounts in U.S. banks. But then Donald Trump got in office, and in the final days of his administration in 2021, the State Department again designated that Cuba was a state sponsor of terrorism, which is ridiculous. Now, when Joe Biden got into office, people thought, oh, well, that's Barack Obama's vice president. So, of course, Barack Obama will probably just undo what Donald Trump did and go back to Obama's policy. No, 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 no. No, 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 no. No. Joe Biden could have had Cuba taken off the list of state sponsors of terrorism within a few weeks. And 80 House Democrats sent him a letter urging him to do just that within weeks of his inauguration. But instead, Joe Biden actually went further than Donald Trump in attacking Cuba's tourism industry, which is the main engine of the island's economy. A few years ago, the Biden State Department barred foreigners who visit Cuba from visa-free travel to the United States. That means that people from the United Kingdom, from France, from Spain, from other countries, they found out that if they just went on vacation in Cuba, they could forfeit their visa waiver, and many decided not to risk it just for a quick vacation to Cuba. The terror designation, together with more than 200 sanctions enacted against the island since Obama left office, has destroyed the Cuban economy. They've cut revenue to the struggling state. Economists have calculated that the loss of tourism revenue resulting from the terror designation cost this state hundreds of millions of dollars every year. The combined annual cost of the Trump-Biden sanctions amount to billions of dollars a year.
Money, money, money.
Yes, money, money, money. For many people in Cuba, the power outages can last more than 12 hours a day, with pharmacy shelves are barren. The price of medicines on the black market has slipped beyond the reach of most of the people in the country. They don't have money to repair old infrastructure. Hundreds of thousands of people live without running water now, thanks to these sanctions from Donald Trump and now Joe Biden. So this is why I don't support either one of these parties, okay? This is why I say that there is no real difference in foreign policy between the two parties. Right here. So when you see situations like the Cuban people being forced into darkness by the millions, don't blame communism. I'm not saying I support communism. I'm not a communist. I'm not a socialist. I'm a populist. Okay, I support doing whatever helps the public. Okay, in instances where there might be some capitalism, great. In other instances that might be some socialism or communism, great. The happiest, healthiest countries in the world have a mix of capitalism and communism and socialism. All of them do. You look at the happiest, healthiest countries in the world, they are not purely capitalist. They are not purely socialist. They are not purely communist. They are a mix. And that's what I support. I call it populism. That would be the American form of that. But no, I'm not dedicated to any one economic system. But what's happening to Cuba, the strangulation that's happening to Cuba, and a big part of it is because Cuba was right. They were right about a lot of things. They backed the liberation struggles in Central America and Africa. They helped Nelson Mandela. When Nelson Mandela when he got out of prison, the first thing he did was fly to Cuba to thank Fidel Castro for helping South Africans win the struggle against apartheid. And then he brought Fidel Castro to South Africa when he was president and had him get a standing ovation in the South African Congress. Fidel Castro is the devil in this country, but in Africa, he's considered a hero. And there's a reason for that. And also, Cuba has helped keep people like Assata Shakur and other black revolutionaries who were wrongfully prosecuted by the United States. A lot of them are hiding in Cuba. And so a lot of what you're seeing from the Trump administration, from Joe Biden's administration, and since Kamala Harris said that there's nothing that Joe Biden did that she would do anything different, I'm assuming a Kamala administration would be the same. This is what they're mad at. They're mad that Cuba is a country that was on the right side of apartheid, on the right side of helping its people, on the right side of helping people all over the world. And they have made them suffer for that, just like they've made the Haitians suffer from overthrowing slavery.